Today on FAR180, we're going to be discussing the New Testament. And is it authentic? Is it what the original authors wrote? How do we know this? If you have ever wondered if the New Testament is legitimate or not, you do not want to miss this video. Welcome to FAR180, where we discuss faith and reason. We connect hearts and minds and change attitudes 180 degrees. Today we're going to be discussing the Bible, specifically the New Testament, and how do we know that it is what the original authors wrote, and not the telephone game that we used to play when we were children, and when the story got told many times, it was changed. How do we know it is what the original authors wrote? Well, we know this through a science called textual criticism. And it's through this science that we can know whether or not ancient manuscripts are authentic. This science proves or disproves the authenticity by comparing many variables, such as comparing them to other archived documents from the same time, comparing the accuracy of ancient copies and possible variances, comparing their context to other copies, comparing the number of ancient copies made, and comparing the time lapse from when the original copies were written and when the original events occurred. Scholars agree that with any of the textual variances that do occur, that 99% makes no difference at all. For example, in Greek, there are many ways to say a certain thing that they all mean the same thing. For example, if I was to say, David loves Nancy, in Greek, there are hundreds of ways of how to say that. But every one of them would mean the same thing, that David loves Nancy, regardless of what order it might be put in. So how does the New Testament compare to other ancient documents? First of all, the historian Herodotus, who's often known as the father of history. He was a Greek writer, somewhat of a celebrity. He writes about the Persian Wars, and his writings were written around the 5th century BC. The earliest copy we have is around 900 AD, a time lapse of approximately 1300 years from when it was written to the earliest copy. And we have 8 copies. Thucydides, another 5th century BC historian, he chronicles nearly 30 years of war between Athens and Sparta. He addresses questions specific detail about what makes nations go to war. What is the measure of a great leader or a great democracy? Again, the earliest copies we have are around 900 AD, a 1300-year time lapse. And again, we have 8 copies. Tacitus, a 1st century Roman historian and public official, he wrote extensively about the wars in Germania and extensively on the history of the Roman Empire. The earliest copies we have are approximately 1000 AD, 1,000 years after the events took place, and we have 20 copies. Caesar's Gallic Wars details the wars of Julius Caesar against the Gallic tribes and the expansion of the Roman Empire over the Gauls, which is most of current-day Europe. These wars paved the way for Julius Caesar to become the sole ruler of the Republic. It was written in the 1st century. The earliest copy we have is about 900 AD, approximate 900-year time lapse between when it was written to when we have any copies. And we have 9 copies. Livy's Roman history, Titus Livius, he wrote a monumental amount of history of Rome and the Roman people in the 1st century, including the earliest of Rome to the modern era of the 1st century, to the golden age of Latin. It was written in the 1st century. The earliest copies we have again are approximately 900 AD, approximately 900-year time lapse from when it was written to when we have our earliest copies, of which we have 20 copies. So how does this compare to the New Testament? Well, we know the New Testament was written between the years 40 to 100 AD. The earliest copies we have are 130 AD, 30 years after they were written. We have over 5,500 Greek manuscripts and over 10,000 Latin manuscripts and over 5,000 Coptic, Syrian, Armenian, Georgian, Hebrew manuscripts. And you compare the New Testament and its authenticity to other classical writings. we have over 1,000 times more manuscripts and almost 1,000 years earlier. Think about it for a minute. The New Testament was written over 50 years in different styles, different perspectives to different audiences. There's little discrepancy. The authors had no way and no means to corroborate their stories. They couldn't phone one another. They couldn't text, Skype, FaceTime. They couldn't do anything like that to corroborate their stories. That even atheistic scholars agree that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by whatever variances that there may be. So when you read it, you know what you're reading is what the original authors wrote. And isn't that amazing? For me personally, when I read that and I know that that is what was written and how eloquent it is, it's mind-boggling to me. You see, I think that's the arrogance of the modern age. We believe that everything and everybody that came before us was so much less than we are. To me, when I read this, it's very humbling. In the description of this video, I'm going to link a variety of different sources, including Jim Warner Wallace's Cold Case Christianity, where you can see the link and download a PDF for the case for the reliability of the New Testament, as well as 10 principles when considering any alleged Bible contradictions, as well as the New Testament chain of custody, which confirms the authenticity of the documents, as well as a link for the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts on this website, where they catalog ancient manuscripts for anyone to access, as well as FAR180.com, where you can download this PDF for free. And also one of my personal favorites, Dr. Brant Petrie, who wrote a book and has a series of videos on the case for Jesus. And I'm going to let him explain a little bit about that just for a moment.
I've been teaching as a professor now for the last 12 years or so, and over that time I've gotten the opportunity to travel around the country and speak at different Bible conferences and parish missions. And I can't tell you how many times I have had parents come up to me and say, I sent my son or daughter off to college or even off to high school, a Christian, and they came back an atheist or an agnostic. And sometimes they'll tell me that one of the things that played a role in that was the things they were learning in their classes, in their religion courses about the Bible. Things such as the Gospels were really anonymous. We don't really know who wrote them. Or the Gospels were written too late to be reliable. We can't really know what Jesus did and said. They weren't by eyewitnesses. And they're more like folklore or fiction, or like a game of telephone, like a children's game of telephone, than they are like ancient Greco-Roman biographies, accounts of what Jesus did and said. What evidence do we have that they were written by the apostles? What did the ancient Christians believe about who wrote the Gospels in the New Testament? And what did they believe about the lost Gospels, like the Gospel of Judas or Thomas? When were the four Gospels written? Were they too late to be reliable? Were they after the apostles had died? Or were they written during the lifetime of eyewitnesses to Jesus? And then finally, what kind of books are the Gospels? Are they biographies? And if so, how would an ancient reader have read them? As factual accounts of what Jesus did and said, or as more like folklore and fiction? If you've ever struggled with your faith in Jesus, well, why should I believe in Jesus? Is there a good reason for being a Christian? Or is Christianity just one more man-made religion? Then I invite you to come with me on this journey into the biblical and historical evidence for Christ.
So for anyone to suggest that the New Testament texts have been corrupted, they're ignorant of the facts. I heard it said that the Bible stands for basic information before leaving Earth. And isn't it the truth? We know the New Testament is the best preserved literary work in all of antiquity. Nothing compares. So until next time, when anybody asks you why you're Christian, answer is simple. Because it's true. The evidence is beyond any reasonable doubt. If you've enjoyed today's video, please share. Or if you'd like more people to see it, with YouTube's algorithms, hit the thumbs up button and the subscribe button below, and more people will see it. Thank you very much, and God bless.